Hey guys, tonight we delve into one of the most carefully guarded secrets in all of Westeros. The hidden truth behind Daenerys Targaryen that would shake the very foundations of everything we thought we knew about the Dragon Queen. A bloodline mystery so profound, so deliberately concealed, that it spans centuries of careful manipulation and ancient magic. This is not just the story of a girl who hatched dragons. This is the story of a weapon forged in dragon fire across generations, shaped by hands that died long before she drew her first breath. So before you settle in for tonight's journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into the hidden corners of our favorite worlds. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Deep in the forgotten vaults beneath Dragonstone, where the salt air mingles with the scent of ancient stone and dragonbone, there lies a chamber that no maester has ever recorded. Within its walls, 3 dragon eggs rest in perfect preservation, each one bearing a mark that should not exist. Each one singing with a harmony that predates the doom of Valyria itself. And carved into the obsidian walls, written in High Valyrian script so old that even the most learned scholars would struggle to decipher it, is a single prophecy that changes everything we know about the girl who would become the mother of dragons. The prophecy speaks of blood and fire, of a child born not of chance but of careful design. It tells of ancient lords who saw the long night coming and prepared a weapon to face it, a weapon with violet eyes and silver hair, whose very existence would depend on secrets buried so deep that even she would never know the truth of what she really was. But here, in this forgotten chamber, the dragons whisper a different story. They speak of manipulation spanning lifetimes, of bloodlines guided by invisible hands, and of a girl whose destiny was written in dragonfire long before Aegon ever conquered Westeros. They speak of Daenerys Targaryen and the impossible truth of who she really is. Tonight we uncover that truth. Our story begins in the year 299 after Aegon's conquest, 3 years after Robert Baratheon's hammer shattered the Targaryen dynasty at the Trident. The 7 kingdoms have settled into an uneasy peace, but in the shadowed halls of the Red Keep, secrets still whisper through stone corridors like ghosts of the old regime. You are Maester Qyburn, though not yet the man history would remember. In these days you are still a humble scholar, driven by an insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge. Your chains bear links of Valyrian steel, marking your studies in the higher mysteries, and it is this expertise that has brought you to a discovery that will consume the rest of your life. The chamber you stand in has been sealed for 18 years, hidden behind a false wall in the lower levels of Maegor's Holdfast. The air is thick with dust and the metallic tang of old magic. Torchlight flickers across walls lined with tomes bound in dragon scale, their pages yellow with age, but preserved by the dry, cold air that seems to flow from the very stones themselves. Your fingers trace the spine of a leather-bound journal, its cover marked with the 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. The leather is soft, supple, as if it were bound yesterday rather than decades ago. When you open it, the pages release the faint scent of sulfur and something else, something that makes your skin prickle with an almost electric sensation. The handwriting within is precise, controlled, written in the flowing script of High Valyrian. But there are other hands here too. Margin notes in different inks, different languages, common tongue, Old Valyrian, and scripts you cannot immediately identify. Some entries span pages, others are brief, cryptic observations. All of them concern one subject that sends a chill down your spine: the breeding and manipulation of Dragonlord bloodlines. Your companion in this discovery shuffles closer, his weathered face illuminated by the dancing torchlight. Septon Barth was once Grand Maester to King Jaehaerys, a man whose wisdom was legend throughout the realm. Now, in his final years, he moves like a man carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "I served them for 40 years, he whispers, his voice barely audible in the ancient chamber. "I thought I knew their secrets. I thought I understood the nature of dragon blood." His gnarled fingers point to a particular passage in the journal. But this changes everything we believed about the last of their line. You lean closer to read the entry he indicates. The date at the top makes your blood run cold. It was written only months before Daenerys Targaryen was born, in the dying days of the rebellion that would see her family slaughtered. But the content speaks not of immediate danger or escape plans. Instead, it details something far more chilling. A centuries-long project, nearing completion. The journal speaks of bloodlines traced back to old Valyria, of genetic combinations tested and refined across generations. It mentions the doctrine of exceptionalism, not as a religious convenience, but as a carefully maintained breeding program designed to preserve and concentrate specific traits that went far beyond the simple ability to ride dragons. Your eyes scan page after page of genealogical charts that map Targaryen marriages with a precision that would make the Citadel's records look like a child's scribbling. Every union, every child, every death is noted not just as historical fact, but as data points in an ongoing experiment. An experiment that, according to these records, was designed to create something specific. A perfect vessel for dragonfire. But as you delve deeper into the journal, inconsistencies begin to emerge. References to collaborators whose names do not appear in any official records. Mentions of resources and knowledge that no single family, no matter how powerful, could have accumulated alone. And most disturbing of all, calculations that project forward decades, even centuries, as if the authors knew exactly when their ultimate creation would be needed. Septon Barth moves to another section of the chamber, where stone shelves hold artifacts that make your maester's training seem woefully inadequate. A dragon egg sits in a cradle of Valyrian steel, but its surface bears markings you have never seen before. Symbols that seem to shift and writhe in the torchlight as if the shell itself were alive. They were not just preserving their bloodline, the old Septon says, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. They were refining it, perfecting it, creating something that had never existed before, not even in the height of the Valyrian freehold. You lift the journal again, turning to pages near the end. The handwriting here is different, more urgent, as if written in great haste. The entries speak of the final phase, of a child who would be born with abilities that surpassed even the greatest dragon lords of old. A child who would need to remain ignorant of her true nature until the time was right. A child named Daenerys. But even as these revelations sink in, questions multiply faster than answers. If this breeding program spanned centuries, who orchestrated it? How did they maintain secrecy across generations of political upheaval? And most importantly, what were they preparing Daenerys for that required such careful, methodical creation? The torchlight flickers, casting dancing shadows across the chamber walls, and you realize that what you have discovered here is not just the secret of one girl's origins, but evidence of a conspiracy that reaches back to the very roots of Valyrian civilization itself. The weight of what you have discovered settles upon your shoulders like a heavy cloak as you close the journal and secure it within your robes. Septon Barth watches you with eyes that have seen too much, his weathered face creased with concern as he extinguishes the torches one by one. The chamber returns to darkness, but the knowledge you carry burns brighter than any flame. You have accepted a quest that will consume years of your life, perhaps decades. The truth behind Daenerys Targaryen's bloodline is not something that can be unraveled in a single night of reading dusty tomes. It is a mystery that spans continents and centuries, woven into the very fabric of Valyrian history and hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. The journey begins at dawn, when you and Septon Barth make your way through the winding streets of King's Landing toward the harbor. The city awakens around you with the familiar sounds of merchants hawking their wares, the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, and the distant cry of gulls circling above the fishing boats. But your mind is elsewhere, focused on the fragments of truth you glimpsed in that hidden chamber. Your first destination is Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, and the place where Daenerys herself was born during the storm that earned her the name Stormborn. If the journal speaks truth, then the castle's foundations hold secrets that predate even Aegon's conquest. The volcanic island was chosen not merely for its strategic position, but for reasons that run much deeper into the mysteries of dragon lore. The ship that carries you across Blackwater Bay is a modest trading vessel, its captain paid well enough to ask no questions about his passengers or their destination. As the Red Keep fades into the morning mist behind you, Septon Barth joins you at the rail, his aged hands gripping the worn wood as he stares out at the grey waters. "I have carried this knowledge for 18 years, he says quietly, his words almost lost in the sound of wind and waves. "Since the night she was born, I have wondered if we were witnessing the birth of a child or the culmination of something far more significant. The storm that night was not natural, you know. It came from the east, from the direction of Old Valyria, and it brought with it a smell of sulfur and smoke that had nothing to do with the volcanic vents of Dragonstone. As the island comes into view, its dark peaks rising from the sea like the spine of some ancient dragon, you feel a strange pull in your chest." The journal had mentioned this sensation, describing it as the call of awakened blood responding to places of power. Even you, with no claim to Valyrian heritage, can sense something in the air around Dragonstone that makes your skin tingle and your pulse quicken. The castle itself looms above you as your ship approaches the harbor, its twisted towers and dragon-carved battlements creating a silhouette that seems to shift and writhe against the cloudy sky. This is architecture born from a civilization that understood the deeper mysteries of stone and fire, where every arch and buttress was designed not just for strength, but to channel and focus energies that most maesters would dismiss as superstition. Your footsteps echo through the empty halls as you explore the castle's abandoned chambers. Robert Baratheon's men stripped away most of the valuable furnishings when they seized the island, but they could not remove the more fundamental secrets built into the very walls. The journal had provided you with a crude map of hidden passages and concealed chambers, drawn by someone who knew Dragonstone's secrets intimately. In the depths beneath the castle, where the volcanic rock meets the constructed foundations, you find the first of the hidden chambers mentioned in the journal. The air here is warm, heated by vents that tap into the island's geological heart, and the walls are lined with alcoves that once held dragon eggs. Most are empty now, but the residual energy remains, a thrumming sensation that you can feel in your bones. Septon Barth runs his fingers along the carved runes that decorate the chamber walls, his expression growing more troubled with each symbol he deciphers. "These are not just decorative elements," he murmurs. "They form a pattern, a configuration designed to amplify and focus the natural energies of this place. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to create the perfect environment for hatching dragon eggs and nurturing young dragon lords. But it is in the castle's highest tower that you make your most significant discovery. The chamber at the tower's peak was once Aegon's private study, but hidden behind a false wall you find something that predates the Conqueror by centuries. An ancient orrery crafted from Valyrian steel and dragonglass, its complex mechanisms still functioning despite the passage of years. The device tracks not just the movements of stars and planets, but cosmic alignments that occur only once in generations. As you study its intricate workings, you begin to understand that the timing of Targaryen births was not left to chance. The journal's breeding program was coordinated with celestial events, ensuring that each generation would be born under specific astronomical conditions. The Ori's current configuration shows an alignment that occurred 18 years ago during the storm that accompanied Daenerys' birth. But as you adjust the mechanism to project forward in time, you discover something that makes your blood run cold. The next such alignment will occur within a matter of years, and according to the calculations embedded in the device, it will herald an event that the ancient builders considered the culmination of their centuries-long project. The bleeding star that has appeared in recent nights suddenly takes on new significance. It is not a random celestial phenomenon, but the first sign of the approaching alignment. The journal had mentioned such portents, describing them as harbingers of the final phase in their grand design. As evening falls over Dragonstone, you and Septon Bath gather in the castle's great hall, surrounded by empty chairs and cold hearths that once hosted the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. The old Septon produces a small leather pouch from his robes, revealing a collection of items he has preserved since Daenerys' birth. A lock of silver hair so fine it seems to shimmer with its own inner light. A small piece of fabric from the swaddling clothes that wrapped her as an infant, embroidered with symbols that match those you found in the hidden chamber. She was different from the moment she drew breath, he tells you, his voice heavy with memory. Not just in appearance, though her eyes held depths that seemed impossible in a newborn. There was something else. Something that made the very air around her seem to hum with potential energy. I have delivered many children in my years of service, but never one whose presence seemed to resonate with the stone walls of Dragonstone itself. The fabric in his hands bears embroidery worked in thread so fine it might have been spun from precious metal. The patterns are not random decorative elements, but form a complex sigil that incorporates dragon imagery with symbols you are only beginning to recognize from your study of pre-Doom Valyrian texts. This is not the simple three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, but something far older and more significant. Your quest has officially begun, and already the implications are staggering. Daenerys Targaryen was not simply born into an ancient bloodline. She was the intended culmination of a breeding program that may have started before the dragons ever left Old Valyria. The question that now drives you forward is not just who orchestrated this magnificent conspiracy, but what they were preparing her to face that required such careful, methodical preparation. Your exploration of Dragonstone's deepest secrets continues as the morning sun casts long shadows through the castle's twisted corridors. The Ori's revelations have given new urgency to your investigation, and you find yourself drawn to areas of the castle that even the most thorough searches by Robert's men failed to uncover. In the chamber where dragon eggs were once incubated, you discover something that makes your hands tremble as you lift it from its resting place. A crystalline sphere no larger than your fist, its surface clouded with what appears to be smoke trapped within the glass. Septon Bath recognizes it immediately, his face paling as he identifies the artifact. "A dragon dream crystal," he whispers, his voice filled with awe and fear in equal measure. "I thought them all destroyed when the doom came to Valyria. These were used by the ancient dragon lords to record and preserve visions, particularly those that came through the gift of dragon dreams." The crystal feels warm in your hands, and as you hold it up to the light filtering through the chamber's narrow windows, the smoke within begins to swirl and coalesce. Images form in the clouded depths, hazy at first, but growing clearer as the crystal responds to your touch. What you see defies everything you thought you knew about the nature of prophecy and the flow of time itself. The visions show Daenerys as a child, but not as she lived her early years in exile. Instead, you see her in places that should not exist, surrounded by dragons that died centuries before her birth. She walks through the Great Pyramid of Meereen before that city was even built, her small hand trailing along walls that shimmer with the same otherworldly energy you have felt in this chamber. But most disturbing of all, you see her as an infant, cradled not in her mother's arms, but in the hands of figures whose faces are obscured by shadow. These mysterious guardians move through chambers filled with apparatus that seems to blend the mechanical with the magical, tending to the child with a care that speaks of purpose far beyond simple protection. Septon Barth peers over your shoulder as the images continue to unfold within the crystal. She was not simply born, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. She was prepared, shaped. These visions show her in the first months of life. But that is not Dragonstone around her. Those chambers exist somewhere else, somewhere that our histories have forgotten. The crystal's visions shift, showing you glimpses of texts written in languages that predate even High Valyrian. The scribes who work over these ancient tomes wear robes that bear no sigil you recognize, their faces marked with tattoos that seem to shift and change as you watch. They are recording something, preserving knowledge that relates directly to the child in their care. One image crystallizes with particular clarity, showing a massive chamber where 3 dragon eggs rest in cradles of black stone. But these are not the eggs that Daenerys would eventually hatch. These are different, older, their shells bearing markings that seem to pulse with their own inner light. The child Daenerys reaches toward them with tiny fingers, and where her skin makes contact with the shells, the markings flare brighter. The vision fades, leaving you staring into clouded glass once more, but the implications of what you have seen send your mind reeling. The journal's breeding program was only part of a larger design, one that involved not just genetic manipulation, but the preservation and application of magical knowledge that most of the world believes to be lost forever. Your investigation takes you deeper into Dragonstone's foundations, following passages that seem to have been carved directly from the volcanic rock by tools that left surfaces smoother than any stonemason could achieve. The air grows warmer as you descend, and you begin to detect traces of that same otherworldly energy that permeated the Dragon Dream crystal. In a chamber so deep that you suspect it lies below the level of the sea itself, you find evidence that forces you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about the fall of House Targaryen. The walls here are covered with a substance that looks like obsidian, but feels warm to the touch, and embedded within this material are symbols that seem to have been formed by intense heat rather than carved by any tool. The symbols tell a story that contradicts the official histories of Robert's rebellion. According to these markings, the Targaryens did not simply flee Dragonstone in desperate haste when the rebellion turned against them. Instead, they enacted a carefully planned evacuation that had been prepared for decades in advance. The pregnant Resiel did not simply escape to give birth in safety. She was transported to a specific location chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with avoiding Robert's forces. Septon Barth traces the symbols with trembling fingers, his knowledge of ancient scripts allowing him to decipher their meaning. They speak of a completion, he says, his voice filled with wonder and dread. The birth of Daenerys was not the beginning of her story, but the culmination of plans that began before Aegon ever set foot on Westeros. She was born in a place of power, surrounded by protectors who understood her true significance. But the symbols also reveal something that fills you with unease. The protectors who guided Daenerys' birth were not acting out of loyalty to House Targaryen. They served a different master, one whose identity remains hidden behind layers of ancient secrecy. Their purpose in preserving and shaping the Targaryen bloodline was not to restore the Iron Throne, but to prepare for something far more significant. The chamber yields one more secret before you are forced to leave by the rising tide that threatens to flood the lower passages. Hidden beneath a stone that can only be moved by applying pressure to specific points in a precise sequence, you find a collection of items that should not exist in the same place. Dragon scales that shimmer with colors not seen in any known species, a vial of liquid that glows with soft silver light, its contents moving with a life of their own, and most significantly, a second journal bound in leather that bears the mark of a different dragon entirely. This journal's pages are written in a script that predates even the oldest Valyrian texts you have studied. The language is similar enough to High Valyrian that you can understand fragments, but many passages remain frustratingly obscure. What you can decipher speaks of bloodlines that extend far beyond the known Targaryen genealogies, reaching back to the very first dragon lords who ruled over Old Valyria. The journal reveals that the Targaryens were not the only Dragonlord family to survive the Doom. Others escaped, scattering across the known world and beyond, carrying with them fragments of the knowledge and power that had made Valyria great. But unlike the Targaryens, these survivors did not seek to rebuild an empire. Instead, they dedicated themselves to preserving and perfecting the bloodline magic that had been their civilization's greatest achievement. As you climb back toward the surface, leaving the flooded chamber behind, you carry with you the knowledge that Daenerys Targaryen is not simply the last scion of a fallen dynasty. She is the product of a conspiracy that spans centuries and involves forces that have remained hidden since the doom of Valyria itself. The question that now drives your investigation forward is not just what these forces intended to achieve, but whether their plan is already too far advanced to be stopped. The journey from Dragonstone to Pentos takes 7 days across the narrow sea, and during those long hours aboard the merchant vessel, you find yourself constructing what seems like a reasonable explanation for everything you have discovered. The evidence points toward a conclusion that, while extraordinary, fits within the bounds of what you understand about Targaryen history and the nature of their bloodline. Septon Barth sits across from you in the ship's small cabin, his weathered hands turning the pages of the second journal you discovered in Dragonstone's depths. The old man's expression grows more troubled with each entry he manages to translate, but when you share your emerging theory about Daenerys' origins, he nods slowly as if your words confirm his own suspicions. The breeding program was real, you say, organizing your thoughts as you speak. The journal from King's Landing proves that the Targaryens were deliberately manipulating their bloodline for centuries, concentrating specific traits that would manifest in a chosen heir. Daenerys was born during a cosmic alignment that had been calculated in advance, in a place prepared specifically for her birth. The Dragon Dream Crystal shows that she was subjected to magical influences from her earliest days, shaped by forces that understood her destiny better than she ever could. The theory feels solid as you construct it, built upon evidence that cannot be dismissed. The Ori at Dragonstone proves that the Targaryens possessed knowledge of astronomical events that they used to time significant births. The breeding records show a clear pattern of genetic manipulation spanning generations. The Dragon Dream Crystal reveals that Daenerys' early development was guided by unknown guardians who possessed magical abilities that most believed to be lost. She is the culmination of everything her family worked toward. You continue, your confidence growing as the pieces seem to fit together. Not just another Targaryen heir, but the perfect synthesis of all the bloodline magic they preserved from Old Valyria. Her ability to hatch dragons and survive fire, her prophetic dreams, her natural command over the creatures of legend, all of these traits were carefully bred into her lineage over centuries of selective breeding. Septon Barth closes the journal and looks out through the cabin's small porthole at the grey waters of the narrow sea. It would explain much, he says quietly. The way she seemed to call to the dragons, even as a child, the strange resonance between her presence and places of power. If she truly is the product of such careful breeding, then her achievements in Essos make more sense. She was not simply lucky or naturally gifted. She was designed for exactly the role she has come to fill. The merchant captain calls from above deck, announcing that the great port of Pentos has come into view. As you climb up to see the city's famous towers rising from the coastal plains, you feel satisfied that you have solved at least part of the mystery surrounding Daenerys Targaryen. The evidence supports your theory, and the implications, while staggering, fit within the framework of what you know about Valyrian bloodline magic. Pentos sprawls before you as your ship enters the harbor, its walls and towers, speaking of wealth accumulated through centuries of trade. This is where Daenerys spent her earliest years in exile, protected by the Magister Illyrio Mopatis and his network of allies. If your theory is correct, then her time here was not the desperate flight of royal refugees, but a carefully orchestrated continuation of the breeding program that had shaped her birth. The Magister's palace sits on a hill overlooking the harbor, its gardens and courtyards designed in the Valyrian style that speaks of nostalgia for a lost golden age. But as you approach the gates, accompanying documents that identify you as a scholar researching Targaryen genealogies, you begin to notice details that suggest your theory may not be as complete as you believed. The guards who admit you to the palace grounds wear armor that incorporates design elements you have never seen before, subtle variations on traditional Pentoshi styles that seem to draw inspiration from much older sources. The servants who escort you through the palace corridors move with a precision that speaks of training far beyond what household staff would normally receive. And the artwork that decorates the walls includes imagery that relates to dragons and bloodline magic in ways that no mere merchant, however wealthy, should understand. Magister Illyrio receives you in a chamber that takes your breath away with its casual display of impossible wealth. The walls are lined with artifacts that belong in the vaults of the citadel or the treasure rooms of kings, and many of them relate directly to the subjects you have been investigating. Dragon eggs that never hatched, preserved in cases of crystal and gold, texts written in scripts that predate the doom of Valyria, and portraits of individuals whose clothing and bearing mark them as members of the ancient Dragonlord aristocracy. You seek to understand the bloodline of the Dragon Queen, Illyrio says, his voice carrying undertones that suggest he knows far more about your investigation than he should. It is a subject that has fascinated scholars for centuries, though few have pursued it with the dedication you have shown. The Targaryens were indeed remarkable in their preservation of the old ways, their careful attention to the purity of their bloodline. But as he speaks, you notice something that makes your carefully constructed theory begin to crumble. The portrait that hangs behind Illyrio's chair shows a woman with silver hair and violet eyes, but she is not dressed in Targaryen colors. Instead, she wears robes that bear the same mysterious symbols you found in the hidden chambers of Dragonstone, and her expression carries a knowing look that suggests she possessed secrets that went far beyond mere royal heritage. "That is my grandmother," Illyrio says, noticing your attention to the portrait. She came to Pentos long before the Targaryens fled Westeros, carrying with her knowledge that had been preserved in her family for generations. It was she who first spoke of the coming of a child who would be born with the blood of old Valyria running true in her veins. The implications of his words send a chill through your bones. If Illyrio's family possessed advanced knowledge of Daenerys' significance, then the conspiracy surrounding her birth extends far beyond the Targaryen bloodline itself. The breeding program you discovered was not simply a family project, but part of a larger network of individuals and organizations working toward the same goal. Septon Barth leans forward in his chair, his aged face creased with concern. "How long have your people been involved in this preservation of bloodline magic?" he asks, his voice careful and measured. Illyrio's smile holds secrets that you are only beginning to suspect. "Since before the doom," he says simply, "since the first warnings reached those wise enough to listen. The Targaryens were not the only ones who understood what was coming, and they were not the only ones who took steps to preserve what could be saved." As the afternoon light fades through the chamber's great windows, you realize that your theory about Daenerys' origins, while containing elements of truth, is merely the surface of a much deeper mystery. The breeding program was real, but it was not conducted by the Targaryens alone. The cosmic alignments and magical preparations were authentic, but they were orchestrated by forces that extend far beyond any single family or bloodline. The question that now haunts you is not whether Daenerys was deliberately created, but how many others were involved in her creation and what their ultimate purpose might be. Your investigation has revealed the existence of a conspiracy, but you are beginning to suspect that what you have uncovered is only the beginning of a truth that stretches back to the very foundations of Valyrian civilization itself. The revelation of Illyrio's family connection to the ancient bloodline preservation sends your investigation spiraling into territories that challenge everything you thought you understood about the scope of this conspiracy. As night falls over Pentos, the Magister leads you and Septon Barth through passages beneath his palace that reveal the true extent of his involvement in the mystery surrounding Daenerys Targaryen. The underground chambers stretch far beyond what any normal residence would require, carved from the living rock with the same precision you witnessed at Dragonstone. The walls here are lined with alcoves that hold artifacts representing dozens of different cultures and time periods, but all connected by the common thread of dragon lore and bloodline magic. You pass displays of Giscari pyramid texts, Dothraki bloodline scrolls, even tablets bearing the script of GoT, all of them relating to the preservation and manipulation of Dragonlord heritage. The network extends across the known world, Illyrio explains as he guides you deeper into the complex. From the Summer Isles to the Grey Waste, from the Sunset Sea to the furthest reaches of Essos, there are families and organizations that have dedicated themselves to preserving the old knowledge. The Targaryens were perhaps the most visible guardians of the bloodline, but they were never alone in their efforts. In a chamber that rivals the greatest libraries of the Citadel, you discover evidence of coordination between groups that history tells us were enemies, correspondence between Valyrian survivors and the priests of R'hllor, discussing the theological implications of dragon magic, trade agreements between free cities that include clauses related to the protection and movement of individuals with specific bloodline markers. Even diplomatic communications between the Iron Bank of Bravos and the Warlocks of Qarth, negotiating funding for research into bloodline enhancement techniques. Septon Barth runs his fingers along the spines of books that should not exist in the same collection, his expression growing more amazed and disturbed with each volume he examines. These texts represent knowledge that was supposedly lost when the Doom came to Valyria, he whispers. But if they were preserved here in Pentos, then how many other repositories exist? How much of what we believe about the fall of the Freehold is deliberately constructed mythology? The answer comes from an unexpected source. In the deepest chamber of the complex, where the air carries the scent of sulfur and ancient magic, you encounter a figure that makes your blood freeze in your veins. An elderly woman sits beside a pool of water that glows with its own inner light, her silver hair and violet eyes marking her as unmistakably Targaryen. But her presence here raises questions that shatter your understanding of recent history. "I am Daenerys Targaryen," she says, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Sister to Aerys, aunt to Daenerys, and guardian of secrets that even my brother never suspected. I have been waiting for scholars brave enough to seek the truth behind the bloodline preservation, and your investigation has finally brought you to the heart of the mystery." The implications of her survival send your mind reeling. According to all official records, Daenerys died in childhood, decades before the rebellion that destroyed her family. But here she sits, aged but vital, surrounded by apparatus that speaks of ongoing magical research and bloodline manipulation. Her very existence proves that the Targaryen family's involvement in the conspiracy went far deeper than you had imagined. "The breeding program was not conducted by the main line of the family," she explains, gesturing toward charts and diagrams that cover the chamber walls. "It was the work of the cadet branches, the secondary lines that were written out of official histories to protect the secrecy of our true purpose. While Aerys played at being king and Rhaegar dreamed of prophecies, we were conducting the real work of preparing for what was to come." The charts she indicates reveal a breeding program of staggering complexity, one that involved not just Targaryen bloodlines, but genetic material from families across the known world. Stark, Baratheon, Martell, even bloodlines from beyond Westeros, all carefully tracked and occasionally incorporated into the Great Project. Daenerys was not simply the product of Targaryen inbreeding, but the culmination of centuries of selective breeding that drew from the best bloodlines of multiple continents. The cosmic alignments were important, Diana continues, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting well-memorized lessons. But they were only the beginning. The real work happened in the first years of her life, when her developing mind was most receptive to the influences we needed to instill. The Dragon Dream Crystal you found at Dragonstone was one of dozens used to shape her consciousness, to prepare her for abilities that no natural birth could provide. The pool of glowing water beside her begins to show images as she speaks, visions that reveal the true scope of Daenerys's early conditioning. You see the child in chambers that exist neither at Dragonstone nor in Pentos, surrounded by figures whose faces are obscured by shadow, but whose movements speak of deep, magical knowledge. They guide her through exercises that seem part meditation, part ritual, part surgical procedure, each one designed to enhance specific aspects of her developing abilities. But the most disturbing revelations are yet to come. As Daenerys leads you deeper into the chamber complex, past laboratories where ancient magical techniques are combined with knowledge that seems impossibly advanced, you begin to understand that the bloodline preservation was not simply about creating a perfect dragon lord. It was about creating something that had never existed before, even in the height of Valyrian power. The dragons of old Valyria were magnificent, Diana says, her voice filled with admiration and regret, but they were also limited by the natural constraints of their biology and the magical techniques available to their original creators. We have spent centuries refining those techniques, incorporating knowledge from cultures that the original Dragon Lords never encountered, pushing the boundaries of what is possible when bloodline magic is combined with will and purpose. In the chamber's central laboratory, you discover evidence of experiments that challenge your understanding of the relationship between magic and biology, preserved specimens that show the effects of bloodline enhancement on living tissue, charts that track the development of magical abilities across multiple generations, and most significantly, a collection of dragon eggs that glow with energies unlike anything you have ever encountered. These eggs are not the fossilized remains of long-dead creatures, but something new entirely. Their shells pulse with patterns of light that seem to respond to your presence, and when you place your hand near them, you can feel warmth that has nothing to do with ambient temperature. Diana watches your reaction with satisfaction, her aged face creased with the pride of someone whose life's work has finally achieved its intended result. Daenerys's dragons were not hatched through luck or natural affinity, she reveals. They were created specifically for her, bred from genetic material that incorporates enhancements developed over centuries of research. The bond between them is not simply the traditional connection between Dragonlord and Mount, but something far more intimate and powerful. The chamber holds one more secret that changes everything you thought you understood about the current state of the world. A communication device that resembles the glass candles mentioned in ancient texts, but far more sophisticated in its construction and capabilities. Through this device, Daenerys maintains contact with other members of the network, receiving reports on Daenerys's progress in Essos and coordinating responses to events that threaten the success of their centuries-long project. She is not wandering the continent aimlessly. Daenerys explains as images flicker through the device's crystalline structure. Every city she conquers, every alliance she forms, every challenge she faces, all of it is guided by intelligence and resources that she never suspects exist. The bloodline preservation was only the first phase of the project. Now comes the true test of everything we have worked to achieve. As you absorb these revelations, watching the images of Daenerys' current campaigns play out in the magical viewing device, you realize that your investigation has revealed something far more significant than a simple breeding program. You have uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that spans continents and centuries, one that has shaped the course of history itself in service of goals that remain hidden even now. The glass candle device continues to flicker with images from across the known world, each vision revealing another piece of the vast conspiracy that has shaped Daenerys Targaryen's existence. But it is Daenerys' next revelation that shatters your understanding of everything you believed about the nature of dragons and the bloodlines that command them. "The dragons are not what you think they are," she says, her violet eyes reflecting the ethereal light emanating from the communication device. The creatures that once soared above old Valyria, magnificent as they were, represented only the beginning of what was possible when magic and biological manipulation were combined with true understanding of the deeper mysteries. She leads you to another chamber, one that houses specimens and artifacts that make your scholarly training seem woefully inadequate. Preserved in crystalline cases are what appear to be dragon embryos, but their development shows characteristics that no natural creature should possess. Extra organs that pulse with their own internal light, neural structures that seem far too complex for any known species, and most disturbing of all, tissue samples that respond to your presence as if they were still alive. The original dragons were magnificent predators, perfectly adapted for their role as weapons of war and symbols of power, Deanna explains as she guides you past displays that chronicle centuries of biological research. But they were also limited by the constraints of natural evolution and the magical techniques available to their creators. We have spent generations pushing beyond those limitations, creating something that transcends the boundary between magical creature and living weapon. The specimens before you tell a story of gradual enhancement and refinement that spans centuries. Early attempts that failed, producing creatures too unstable to survive. Intermediate successes that showed promise but lacked the power and intelligence of their intended design. And finally, the breakthrough that produced the genetic templates used to create Daenerys' dragons. Septon Barth examines the developmental charts with the fascination of someone whose lifetime of study is being rewritten before his eyes. These creatures were engineered, he says, his voice filled with awe and horror in equal measure. Not just bred or magically enhanced, but designed from the most fundamental level to serve specific purposes. The bond between Daenerys and her dragons is not traditional Dragon Lord heritage, but something far more intimate and permanent. The truth of his words becomes clear as Daenerys activates another viewing device, this one showing images of Daenerys with her dragons that reveal details invisible to normal observation. The connection between them manifests as streams of energy that flow between the girl and her creatures, a constant exchange of thoughts, emotions, and sensory information that makes them more like extensions of her own body than separate entities. She experiences everything they experience, Daenerys explains, pointing to the energy patterns that pulse in perfect synchronization between Daenerys and her dragons. Their vision becomes her vision. Their strength supplements her own. Their magical abilities amplify and focus her inherited powers. This is not simply a girl who can command dragons, but a hybrid consciousness that incorporates both human intelligence and draconic power in ways that were impossible until we developed the techniques needed to create such a bond. But the most shocking revelation is yet to come. As the images continue to play, you begin to notice something that makes your blood run cold with its implications. The dragons are growing at a rate that defies everything known about their species, not just in size but in intelligence and magical capability. What you initially assumed was natural development is actually an accelerated maturation process that will culminate in creatures far more powerful than any dragon that ever flew above old Valyria. The original timeline called for decades of gradual development. Daenerys admits, her expression troubled as she watches the images of the rapidly maturing dragons. But recent events have forced us to accelerate the process. The threats that Daenerys will face in the coming years require her to reach her full potential far sooner than we originally planned. The viewing device shifts to show images from other parts of the world, revealing threats that most people remain unaware of. Strange weather patterns that speak of magical disturbances far to the north, political upheavals in Westeros that threaten to destabilize the careful balance of power the conspiracy has maintained for generations, and most ominously, signs of activity in the ruins of old Valyria that suggest something long dormant is beginning to stir. The preservation of the bloodline was never an end in itself, Dana continues, her voice taking on the urgency of someone who has spent her life working toward a goal that may now be threatened. It was preparation for challenges that we knew would eventually arise. The long night is returning, but it will not come alone. Other forces, things that were bound and sleeping since the doom, are beginning to wake, and only someone with Daenerys' enhanced abilities will be capable of facing them. The chamber holds additional secrets that reveal the true scope of what the conspiracy has been preparing for. Maps that show locations across the known world where similar preservation efforts have been underway, each one focused on different aspects of the magical knowledge that once made Valyria great. Archives that detail threats identified centuries ago by seers and prophets whose warnings were dismissed by those in power, and most significantly, weapons and artifacts that have been prepared specifically for the coming conflict. You examine a sword that appears to be forged from the same material as Valyrian steel, but its surface bears engravings that pulse with their own inner light. When you lift it, the blade seems to sing with harmonics that resonate in your bones, and you can feel power flowing through the metal that has nothing to do with conventional craftsmanship. The weapons were created using techniques that combine traditional Valyrian methods with knowledge preserved from civilizations that predated the Freehold. Daenerys explains as you study the impossible blade. They are designed to function in harmony with enhanced bloodline magic, amplifying and focusing the wielder's abilities in ways that normal weapons cannot achieve. But it is the final revelation that truly changes your understanding of everything you have discovered. The glass candle device shows you an image that makes your scholarly mind struggle to process what you are seeing. Daenerys stands in a place that should not exist, surrounded by dragons that dwarf even the great beasts of legend, her eyes glowing with power that transforms her from young woman into something that transcends human limitations entirely. This is what she was created to become, Dana says, her voice filled with pride and trepidation in equal measure, not simply the last Targaryen or even the greatest dragon lord who ever lived, but something new entirely, a fusion of human consciousness and draconic power that represents the next stage in the evolution of magical bloodlines. The image shows Daenerys facing threats that seem to emerge from nightmare itself, creatures of shadow and ice that dwarf even her enhanced dragons, wielding powers that make the great magic of old Valyria seem like parlor tricks. But she meets these challenges with abilities that no single individual should possess, drawing on centuries of accumulated knowledge and enhancement to face enemies that would destroy any normal opponent. As the visions fade, and the chamber returns to its normal illumination, you realize that your investigation has revealed something far more significant than a conspiracy to preserve royal bloodlines. You have uncovered evidence of preparation for a conflict that will determine the future of magic itself in the known world, with Daenerys Targaryen serving as the focal point for powers and abilities that represent the culmination of centuries of careful planning and development. The question that now drives your investigation forward is not just what threats the conspiracy has been preparing for, but whether their preparations will be sufficient to face challenges that may exceed even their enhanced expectations. The weight of what you have learned in the depths of Illyrio's palace settles upon you like a heavy shroud as Dana leads you to the final chamber in the underground complex. This room differs from all the others, its walls carved from a single piece of what appears to be black stone, but as you draw closer, you realize the material is not stone at all. It is crystallized dragonfire, formed under pressures and temperatures that should not be achievable by any known process. This chamber was created using techniques that predate the founding of Valyria itself, Daenerys explains, her voice echoing strangely in the crystalline space. The knowledge came from civilizations that ruled before the first Dragonlords ever took flight, preserved through methods that most scholars would consider impossible. What you see here represents the convergence of magical traditions from across the known world, all focused on a single purpose. At the chamber's center stands a structure that defies easy description, part altar, part laboratory, part astronomical device. It incorporates elements that span cultures and time periods in ways that suggest connections between civilizations that history tells us never had contact with each other. Dothraki bloodline, totems rest beside a shy shadow binding circles. Ytiz star charts share space with Giscari pyramid texts, and binding it all together are symbols that match those you found in the deepest chambers of Dragonstone. The bloodline preservation was never about a single family or even a single species, Daenerys says as she activates controls that cause the crystalline walls to glow with their own inner light. It was about preparing for the return of forces that once threatened to consume everything that lived. The long night was not simply a period of extended winter, but a manifestation of entities that exist beyond the normal boundaries of life and death. The glowing walls begin to display images that chronicle events from the deepest reaches of history, showing civilizations that rose and fell long before the Maesters began keeping records. You see great cities that gleam with impossible architecture, populated by beings that seem to blend human and draconic characteristics in ways that challenge your understanding of what is possible through bloodline magic. But you also see the threats that destroyed these civilizations. Shadows that move with their own malevolent intelligence, consuming light and life wherever they spread. Creatures of ice and darkness that turn the very air around them into killing cold. And most terrifying of all, entities that seem to exist partially outside normal reality, their presence warping the fundamental laws that govern magic and physics. The first Dragonlords were not conquerors seeking empire. Daenerys reveals as the images continue to unfold. They were survivors of civilizations that fell to these ancient threats, carrying with them the knowledge and bloodline magic needed to fight enemies that normal weapons cannot touch. Valyria was built as a fortress against the returning darkness, its dragons bred and enhanced specifically to face threats that come from beyond the boundaries of the known world. The implications of her words send your mind reeling as you begin to understand the true scope of the conspiracy you have uncovered. The centuries of bloodline preservation, the careful manipulation of political events, the enhancement of draconic abilities, all of it was preparation for a conflict that makes the Wars of Kings seem like children's games. Septon Barth studies the astronomical components of the central device, his expression growing more troubled as he deciphers the calculations embedded in its construction. These star charts track celestial events that occur only once in millennia, he says, his voice heavy with the weight of revelation. But they also show convergences that will bring the barriers between worlds to their thinnest point. The entities that threaten our reality will find it easier to manifest physically during these alignments. The device responds to his examination by projecting a three-dimensional map of the known world, but overlaid with information that reveals the true nature of the threats gathering in hidden places. The ruins of old Valyria pulse with energies that speak of something vast and malevolent stirring in the smoking sea. The far north of Westeros shows disturbances that extend far beyond simple changes in weather patterns. And most ominously, points of darkness appear at locations across Essos where reality itself seems to be weakening. The doom of Valyria was not a natural disaster, or even the result of magical hubris. Daenerys continues, her voice filled with the pain of ancient loss. It was a deliberate sacrifice, the destruction of our greatest stronghold to prevent entities from using it as a gateway into our world. The Dragon Lords who died there bought us centuries of time to prepare for the entity's eventual return, but that time is now running out. The truth of the conspiracy's ultimate purpose becomes clear as the device shows you projections of what will happen when the celestial alignments reach their peak. The barriers between worlds will weaken to the point where the ancient enemies can manifest in physical form, bringing with them powers that dwarf even the greatest achievements of Valyrian magic. Only someone with abilities that transcend normal human limitations could hope to face such threats. Daenerys was not created to rule kingdoms or conquer cities. Daenerys reveals, her violet eyes reflecting the otherworldly light emanating from the chamber walls. She was designed to be a weapon against enemies that exist beyond the boundaries of life and death. Her enhanced bloodline magic, her bond with creatures that exceed the capabilities of normal dragons, her growing mastery of powers that no single individual should possess, all of it was carefully planned to prepare her for a war that will determine whether life itself survives in our world. But the device reveals another truth that fills you with both hope and terror. Daenerys is not the only enhanced individual who has been prepared for the coming conflict. Across the known world, in locations that correspond to the points of greatest threat, other projects have been underway. Individuals whose bloodlines have been enhanced in different ways, each one designed to face specific aspects of the multifaceted threat that approaches. The network extends further than you imagine, Daenerys says, as the device shows you glimpses of these other enhanced individuals. In the far north, bloodlines that carry the magic of the first men have been preserved and enhanced to face threats of ice and darkness. In the east, the blood of old Gis has been combined with shadow magic to create warriors who can fight enemies that exist partially outside normal reality. Even in Westeros, families whose heritage reaches back to the Age of Heroes have been unknowingly prepared for roles they do not yet understand. The revelation that the conspiracy involves multiple enhanced bloodlines working in coordination changes everything you thought you understood about the scope of the threat. This is not simply about preserving Targaryen heritage or even preparing a single individual to face supernatural enemies. It is about orchestrating a coordinated response to threats that require different types of enhanced abilities working in harmony. But the most disturbing truth is yet to come. The device shows you calculations that project the timeline for the entity's return, and the margins for error are smaller than anyone involved in the conspiracy had hoped. The celestial alignments are accelerating, driven by forces that the ancient seers who designed the preservation program could not have anticipated. The threats that Daenerys and her fellow enhanced individuals were designed to face may manifest years or even decades before they reach their full potential. The accelerated timeline explains the urgency of recent events. Daenerys admits, her expression troubled as she studies the projected calculations. Daenerys' dragons are maturing faster than planned because the threats they were designed to face are manifesting sooner than expected. The enhanced abilities that were meant to develop gradually over decades are being forced to emerge rapidly, with consequences that none of us can fully predict. As you absorb the full scope of these revelations, watching the projections of approaching cosmic alignments and awakening ancient enemies, you realize that your investigation has uncovered something far more significant than historical secrets. You have discovered evidence of a war that will determine the fundamental nature of reality itself, with enhanced individuals serving as the last line of defense against forces that seek to unmake everything that lives and breathes in the known world. The crystalline chamber fills with additional figures as Daenerys activates communication devices that reach across continents and beyond the boundaries of the known world. One by one, representatives of the vast conspiracy reveal themselves through magical viewing crystals, their faces appearing in the air like ethereal portraits painted from light and shadow. The first to materialize is an elderly man whose features mark him as coming from the Summer Isles, but his robes bear symbols that predate any civilization you have studied. When he speaks, his voice carries harmonics that seem to resonate directly in your bones, and his words reveal knowledge that should have been lost with the civilizations that once flourished in the far south. The bloodlines of the southern kingdoms have been preserved through methods that your northern scholars would consider impossible, he says, his image flickering slightly as the magical connection struggles to maintain clarity across such vast distances. We have maintained the genetic heritage of peoples who ruled when the sea levels were different and the very shape of the continents bore little resemblance to current geography. The enhanced abilities we have preserved are designed to face threats that emerge from the deepest ocean trenches, entities that predate land-dwelling civilizations entirely. A second figure appears, this one a woman whose pale skin and distinctive facial tattoos mark her as coming from the far reaches of Essos, possibly from lands beyond even the Great Grass Sea. Her voice carries accents that suggest languages that evolved in complete isolation from the linguistic families known to Western scholars. The steps hold memories that reach back to the first conflicts between the entities of shadow and the forces of life, she reveals. Her words accompanied by images that show vast grasslands populated by peoples whose mastery of bloodline magic allowed them to commune directly with the spirits of horses and the wind itself. We have preserved techniques that allow consciousness to exist independently of physical form, abilities that will be essential when facing enemies whose very presence corrupts the boundary between life and death. As more figures join the ethereal council, you begin to understand the true scope of the network that has been working toward this moment for centuries. Representatives from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai speak of bloodlines that incorporate darkness itself as a source of power. Delegates from the Jade Sea reveal preservation efforts that have maintained the genetic heritage of sea peoples whose abilities transcend the normal limitations of human physiology. Even from the frozen wastes beyond the known world come voices that speak of preparations among peoples who have adapted to survive in conditions that would kill normal humans within minutes. Septon Barth listens to these revelations with the fascination of someone whose lifetime of study is being rewritten in real time. The scope of coordination required for such a project staggers the imagination, he says, his voice filled with awe at the logistical and organizational achievements represented by the conspiracy. To maintain communication and coordination across such distances over such spans of time, while keeping the entire operation secret from the political powers that rose and fell during the preservation period, represents an achievement that rivals the construction of the Great Pyramids or the forging of the first Valyrian steel. But it is the final figure to join the council that truly reveals the magnitude of what you have uncovered. The image that materializes in the chamber's center shows a face that should not exist, features that mark the speaker as unmistakably Targaryen, but bearing the lines of someone who has lived far longer than any normal human lifespan would allow. "I am Aegon," the figure says, his voice carrying the weight of centuries and the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Not the conqueror, whose name I share, but the first of our line to understand the true nature of the threats that approach our world. I have lived for over 400 years, sustained by techniques that combine bloodline magic with knowledge preserved from civilizations that ruled before Valyria was even a dream." The implications of his survival and his role in the conspiracy send shockwaves through your understanding of Targaryen history. This is not simply a breeding program maintained by successive generations, but a coordinated effort directed by individuals whose lifespans have been artificially extended to provide continuity and guidance across centuries of preparation. The enhancement of Daenerys represents the culmination of everything we have learned about bloodline magic and genetic manipulation. Aegon continues, his image gesturing toward displays that show the full scope of the modifications that have been incorporated into her developing abilities. But she is not meant to face the approaching threats alone. The network has prepared companions whose abilities will complement and amplify her own, individuals whose enhanced bloodlines will provide the specialized skills needed for different aspects of the coming conflict. The chamber's walls display images of these other enhanced individuals, each one representing a different approach to the challenges that await. A young man whose stark heritage has been combined with magic that allows him to commune with direwolves and manipulate the very essence of winter itself. A woman from Dawn whose Martell bloodline has been enhanced with abilities that let her channel the power of the sun and command creatures of the desert. Even individuals from beyond Westeros whose bloodlines incorporate genetic material from peoples whose very existence has been forgotten by conventional history. The coming conflict will require abilities that no single individual can possess, explains a figure whose features suggest origins in the mysterious lands beyond the Bone Mountains. Each enhanced bloodline has been designed to excel against specific types of threats, but their true power will emerge when they work in coordination, their individual abilities combining to create capabilities that transcend what any one person could achieve alone. As the council continues, you begin to understand that the conspiracy has not simply been preparing enhanced individuals to fight the approaching threats. They have been orchestrating events across the known world to ensure that these individuals will be in the right positions with the right resources and allies when the critical moment arrives. Wars have been started and ended, kingdoms have risen and fallen, all as part of a vast manipulation designed to set the stage for the ultimate confrontation. The Game of Thrones that consumes the attention of kings and lords is merely a distraction, reveals another council member. This one bearing the features of someone from the free cities, but speaking with knowledge that extends far beyond mere political intrigue. While rulers squabble over crowns and territories, we have been positioning the pieces needed for a war that will determine whether consciousness itself survives in this reality. But even as the scope of their preparations becomes clear, troubling questions emerge about the cost and consequences of such massive manipulation. Millions of lives have been shaped by events orchestrated by the conspiracy. Entire civilizations have been guided along paths chosen to serve the greater purpose, and the enhanced individuals themselves have been created without their knowledge or consent. The ethical implications of what we have done cannot be ignored, admits Dana, her voice heavy with the moral weight of centuries of manipulation. We have made choices that affected countless innocent lives, guided events that brought suffering to entire nations, and created individuals who never had the opportunity to choose their own destinies. The question that haunts all of us is whether the approaching threats justify the methods we have employed to prepare for them. As the Ethereal Council prepares to reveal the final secrets about the nature of the threats and the specific roles that each enhanced individual will play in the coming conflict, you realize that your investigation has led you to the heart of moral questions that have no easy answers, involving preparations for a war that may determine the future of consciousness itself. The Ethereal Council falls silent as the ancient Aegon raises his hand, his 400-year-old eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that span the rise and fall of civilizations. The crystalline chamber responds to his gesture by dimming its otherworldly glow, as if preparing for revelations that even this place of power can barely contain. The time has come to reveal the ultimate truth, he says, his voice carrying the weight of centuries spent preparing for this moment. The entities that approach our world are not merely threats to be defeated or enemies to be fought. They are the remnants of the first consciousness that ever existed in this reality, beings of such ancient power that they predate the very concepts of life and death as we understand them. The chamber walls begin to display images that challenge your ability to process what you are seeing. Vast entities that seem to exist partially outside the normal dimensions of space and time, their forms shifting between states of matter that should not be able to coexist. These are not creatures in any sense that mortal minds can comprehend, but fragments of primordial awareness that have been seeking to reclaim dominion over reality since the first sparks of individual consciousness began to emerge. When the universe was young and the barriers between different states of existence were thin, these entities ruled unchallenged. Aegon continues, his words accompanied by visions of cosmic landscapes that bear no resemblance to anything in the known world. But as individual consciousness began to develop, as creatures began to think and dream and hope, the entities found their absolute dominion challenged by forms of awareness that were fundamentally different from their own. The images show the first great war between primordial consciousness and individual awareness, a conflict that raged across dimensions and realities in ways that mortal minds can barely grasp. Mountains were unmade and reformed, seas boiled away into nothingness, entire continents were shifted between different states of existence as the opposing forces struggled for dominance. The entities were driven back, explains the figure from the Summer Isles, his voice joining Aegon's narrative. But they were not destroyed, because destruction in any conventional sense does not apply to consciousness of their magnitude. Instead, they were bound by the combined will of every thinking creature that existed at that time, trapped in dimensions where their influence could not directly affect our reality. But the binding was not permanent, as you learn when the chamber displays astronomical charts that track celestial events across spans of time that dwarf recorded history. The same cosmic alignments that the conspiracy has been preparing for do not simply weaken magical barriers or enhance bloodline abilities. They weaken the fundamental boundaries between dimensions, allowing the bound entities to begin manifesting their influence in physical reality once again. The Long Night was their first successful attempt to break through the barriers, reveals the woman from the eastern steppes. The cold and darkness were not natural phenomena, but the direct influence of entities whose very existence negates the warmth and light that individual consciousness requires to flourish. The heroes who ended that age of darkness did not simply defeat an invasion, they reinforced the barriers that keep the entities contained. The true scope of the conspiracy's purpose becomes devastatingly clear as the chamber shows you projections of what will happen when the entities achieve full manifestation. Not conquest in any conventional sense, but a fundamental transformation of reality itself back to the primordial state where only unified consciousness exists. Every thinking creature would cease to exist as an individual, their awareness absorbed back into the ancient unity that ruled before life began to dream. Daenerys was not created to fight these entities in any conventional sense. Aegon reveals, his words carrying the weight of truth that has driven centuries of preparation. She was designed to serve as an anchor point for individual consciousness itself, a being whose enhanced awareness and bloodline magic can maintain the barriers between dimensions even when the cosmic alignments reach their peak intensity. The chamber displays the full scope of her modifications, showing abilities that transcend anything you previously imagined possible. Her bond with her enhanced dragons is not simply telepathic communication, but a fusion of consciousness that allows her to exist simultaneously in multiple states of awareness. Her growing mastery of fire magic stems not from traditional Targaryen heritage, but from techniques that let her channel the fundamental forces that separate individual consciousness from primordial unity. But even her enhanced abilities would not be sufficient alone, admits Daenerys, her expression troubled as she contemplates the magnitude of what they are asking of her unknowing descendant. The other enhanced individuals represent different aspects of the consciousness anchor that will be needed. Together they form a network of awareness that can maintain the barriers even under conditions that would overwhelm any single mind. The chamber shows you visions of the approaching confrontation, and the images are both magnificent and terrifying beyond description. Daenerys stands at the center of a configuration that includes the other enhanced individuals, their combined consciousness creating a beacon of individual awareness that blazes like a star against the advancing darkness of primordial unity. Her dragons, grown to sizes that dwarf the greatest beasts of legend, serve not as weapons but as extensions of her enhanced awareness, their forms shifting between physical and metaphysical states as they help maintain the dimensional barriers. But the visions also show the cost of such an effort. The consciousness anchor requires total commitment from everyone involved, a merging of individual awareness that borders on the very unity they are fighting to prevent. The enhanced individuals must willingly sacrifice their separate identities to create a collective consciousness powerful enough to face the entities, knowing that success might mean they never again exist as distinct individuals. This is why she could never be told the truth of her nature, Aegon explains, his ancient features creased with pain at the deception that has shaped Daenerys' entire existence. The consciousness anchor can only function if it develops naturally, through experiences and choices that forge the strength of individual will needed to resist primordial unity. If she had known she was created for this purpose, the knowledge would have compromised the very qualities that make her capable of fulfilling it. The chamber reveals one final secret that transforms your understanding of everything you have witnessed. The dragon dreams that have plagued Targaryen bloodlines for generations are not simply prophetic visions or genetic memories. They are fragments of awareness from the entities themselves, bleeding through the weakening barriers as the cosmic alignments approach their peak. Daenerys' ability to experience these dreams without losing her sanity or individual identity proves that her enhanced consciousness can resist the influence that would overwhelm normal minds. The dreams have been growing stronger, observes the figure from beyond the Bone Mountains. As the barriers weaken, the entity's influence increases, and more individuals begin to experience visions of unity that threaten to dissolve their sense of self. Daenerys' resistance to this influence, her ability to maintain her individual identity while experiencing glimpses of primordial consciousness, demonstrates that the enhancement process has achieved its intended result. But even as the scope of the conspiracy's achievement becomes clear, questions remain about whether their preparations will be sufficient. The entities are far more powerful than the ancient seers who designed the preservation program could have anticipated, and the cosmic alignments are occurring with greater intensity than the original calculations predicted. The enhanced individuals may find themselves facing challenges that exceed even their artificially expanded capabilities. As the Ethereal Council prepares to discuss the final phase of their preparations, the moment when Daenerys and her fellow enhanced individuals must be brought together and informed of their true purpose, you realize that you have witnessed the revelation of a conspiracy that dwarfs every other secret in recorded history. The preservation of bloodlines, the manipulation of political events, the creation of enhanced individuals, all of it serves a purpose that will determine whether individual consciousness survives or whether reality returns to the primordial unity that ruled before life began to think and dream and hope. The weight of ultimate truth settles over the crystalline chamber like a shroud woven from starlight and shadow as the Ethereal Council begins to dissolve, each member returning to their distant stations across the known world and beyond. But before the connections fade entirely, the ancient Aegon speaks once more, his words carrying the finality of someone who has spent centuries preparing for a moment that can no longer be delayed. The time for secrecy has ended, he announces, his voice resonating through the chamber with authority that spans lifetimes. The cosmic alignments accelerate beyond our ability to control, and the entities grow stronger with each passing day. Daenerys and the other enhanced individuals must be brought together and informed of their true purpose, regardless of the risks such revelation might pose to their psychological stability. The chamber's walls display a map that shows the current locations of all the enhanced individuals, scattered across continents in positions that seem random but represent the culmination of centuries of careful manipulation. Daenerys herself appears as a blazing point of light in the eastern regions of Essos, her dragons already beginning to manifest abilities that transcend the limitations of their original design. Other lights mark locations from the wall in the far north to the Summer Isles in the distant south, each one representing a consciousness that has been shaped for purposes they do not yet understand. The convergence will begin within the month, reveals Danina, her expression mixing pride in their achievements with fear of what lies ahead. The enhanced individuals will be drawn together by forces they cannot resist, guided by instincts that were built into their very genetic structure. But the process will be traumatic for minds that have lived their entire lives, believing themselves to be merely exceptional, rather than fundamentally different from normal human consciousness. As the council members fade from view, you find yourself alone with Septon Barth and Daenerys in the crystalline chamber, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom and terrible knowledge of centuries spent preparing for cosmic conflict. The old Septon sits heavily in a chair that seems to have been grown from the chamber's crystalline walls, his aged face reflecting the exhaustion of someone whose worldview has been completely transformed. "I have spent my life studying the nature of consciousness and the soul," he says, his voice heavy with the implications of everything he has learned. "But what we have discovered here challenges every assumption about the relationship between individual awareness and universal truth. If the entities succeed in their return, not only will every thinking creature cease to exist, but the very concept of individual thought will be erased from reality as if it had never been. The chamber responds to your presence by displaying visions of what the world might look like after the consciousness anchor has served its purpose, and the images offer both hope and heartbreak in equal measure. Reality itself appears more stable, the barriers between dimensions reinforced to a degree that will prevent the entities from attempting another manifestation for millennia to come. But the cost of this stability is visible in every scene, as the enhanced individuals who served as anchor points exist in a state that can barely be called individual consciousness. They will survive, Daenerys explains, her voice carrying the pain of someone who loves the individuals she has helped create, but knows the price they must pay. But they will never again be separate from each other, in the way that normal humans experience individual identity. Their consciousness will remain merged at a level that allows them to maintain the barriers, a willing sacrifice of personal identity to preserve the concept of individual awareness for all other thinking creatures. The implications extend beyond the enhanced individuals themselves to encompass the entire structure of reality as mortals understand it. Magic itself will be fundamentally changed by the strengthening of dimensional barriers, with many abilities that depend on manipulating the boundaries between different states of existence becoming impossible to perform. The age of great magic that once flourished in Valyria and other ancient civilizations will end, replaced by a more stable but less wondrous world. The dragons will be the first to feel the change. Daenerys continues, gesturing toward displays that show the magnificent creatures in their current enhanced state. Their abilities depend on existing partially outside normal physical reality, a state that will become impossible once the barriers are fully reinforced. They will survive, but as creatures bound entirely to the physical world, their magical abilities reduce to levels that normal dragons possessed before the enhancement process began. But the visions also show compensations for these losses, changes that will benefit the countless ordinary individuals who know nothing of cosmic threats or enhanced bloodlines. The stability that comes from reinforced dimensional barriers will eliminate many of the random magical catastrophes that have plagued civilization throughout history. The elimination of entity influence will reduce the psychological disorders and societal conflicts that stem from exposure to primordial consciousness. Most importantly, individual awareness will be protected from the gradual erosion that occurs when dimensional barriers weaken over time. The choice was never between preserving magic and protecting consciousness, explains the chamber's final revelation, communicated through images that show possible futures extending far beyond the current crisis. It was between allowing individual awareness to slowly dissolve back into primordial unity or accepting the sacrifice of enhanced consciousness to preserve the concept of individual identity for all future generations. The crystalline walls display one last vision that brings the full scope of the conspiracy into focus, showing the moment when Daenerys and her fellow enhanced individuals make their final choice They stand together in a place that exists between dimensions, surrounded by entities whose forms challenge the very concept of individual identity. But instead of fighting these cosmic forces in any conventional sense, they choose to merge their enhanced consciousness into a barrier that separates individual awareness from primordial unity. The dragon dreams were not prophecies of conquest or domination. You realize, as the vision unfolds, understanding finally arriving after witnessing the full scope of the conspiracy. They were memories of the choice that had to be made, echoes of the decision that would preserve individual consciousness at the cost of personal identity for those strong enough to make such a sacrifice. The chamber begins to fade as the revelation reaches its completion, the crystalline walls losing their otherworldly glow as the magical energies that sustain them are redirected toward the approaching crisis. Daenerys escorts you and Septon Bath toward the passage that leads back to the conventional world above, but her expression carries the sadness of someone who knows that the individuals she has helped create will soon cease to exist as separate beings. "Your investigation has served its purpose," she says, as you climb toward the surface, leaving behind the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The knowledge you have gained will help you understand what happens in the days to come, when the enhanced individuals fulfill the destiny that was written into their very genes. But remember that their sacrifice is not defeat but victory, not the end of consciousness but its preservation for all the generations that will follow. As you emerge into the conventional world of Pentos, with its normal concerns and everyday struggles, you carry with you the knowledge that reality itself depends on individuals who will never be remembered by history, enhanced beings who will sacrifice their personal identity to preserve the concept of individual consciousness for everyone else. The dragon dreams that once seemed like fragments of a glorious past are revealed as echoes of a choice that will determine the fundamental nature of reality itself. The sun sets over the peaceful harbor of Pentos as you and Septon Bath make your way slowly through the city's winding streets, carrying within your minds knowledge that transforms every ordinary sight into something profound and precious. Children play in the squares, their laughter echoing off ancient stones that have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Merchants close their shops for the evening, securing goods that represent the simple continuity of daily life. Lovers walk hand in hand along the waterfront, their individual consciousness creating moments of connection that the primordial entities could never understand or appreciate. Each mundane scene carries new significance when viewed through the lens of what you have discovered. The baker kneading dough in his shop window exercises a form of individual creativity that required millions of years to evolve from primordial unity. The sailor mending nets by lamplight demonstrates the problem-solving abilities that emerge only when consciousness exists in separate thinking forms. Even the stray cats that prowl the alleys possess their own unique awareness, their individual personalities representing victory over forces that would reduce all existence to undifferentiated sameness. The gentle evening breeze carries scents from across the narrow sea, bringing whispers of the lands where Daenerys and her dragons prepare for a destiny they do not yet understand. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other enhanced individuals feel the growing pull of instincts that will soon bring them together for the greatest sacrifice in the history of consciousness itself. But here, in this moment of peaceful transition between day and night, ordinary life continues with the quiet dignity of countless individual dreams and hopes. Septon Bath pauses beside the harbor wall, his weathered hands gripping the stone as he gazes out at waters that reflect the first emerging stars. "I have lived long enough to see the rise and fall of kings, the birth and death of dynasties, the ebb and flow of what men call history," he says softly. "But tonight I understand that all of those grand events were merely ripples on the surface of something far deeper and more significant." The stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, each point of light representing distances and possibilities that stretch beyond mortal comprehension. Among them, barely visible to earthbound observers, moves the bleeding star, whose appearance heralded the final phase of preparations that began before human civilization learned to mark the passage of time. Soon, very soon, the cosmic alignments will reach their peak intensity, and the enhanced individuals will fulfill purposes that were encoded in their very essence before they drew their first breath. But for now, in this quiet moment beside peaceful waters, the mystery rests in perfect balance. The dragon dreams that once seemed like echoes of ancient glory are revealed as whispers of choices yet to be made. The bloodlines that appeared to preserve royal heritage are understood as vessels for consciousness itself. The girl who believed herself to be the last scion of a fallen dynasty prepares to become something far more significant than any queen who ever ruled. As the harbor lights begin to twinkle in the gathering darkness, you feel a deep peace settling over your spirit. The investigation that began with fragments of ancient prophecy has led to understanding that transcends the boundaries of any single story or civilization. Daenerys Targaryen was never simply a character in the grand narrative of conquest and power. She was hope itself, consciousness choosing to preserve its own diversity at the cost of individual identity. The gentle lapping of waves against stone creates a rhythm that speaks of eternal cycles, of tides that rise and fall, regardless of the cosmic forces that shape reality beyond mortal perception. And in that rhythm, you hear the whisper that first called you to begin this investigation, now transformed from mystery into understanding. Tonight, consciousness dreams of tomorrow, and in those dreams, individual awareness chooses to endure. Thank you for joining this journey into the hidden truths that shape our favorite worlds. If these mysteries have stirred your imagination, consider subscribing to continue exploring the secrets that lie beneath the surface of legendary tales. Until next time, may your own dreams carry echoes of the extraordinary.